I was at a coffee shop with my computer when this message came across my Facebook Messenger. Okay, so you're always talking about this great and loving God that you serve, and well, why didn't your great and loving God do something yesterday? How can a good God allow that to happen? I thought he was in control up there. Well, the day before, there had been another school shooting where students and teachers alike had lost their lives. These were becoming more and more commonplace, as we know all too well today. My friend was a buddy from high school who was a proud agnostic or atheist, depending on the day you talked to him, and the topic you were talking about. We had had some conversations in the past, mostly over Facebook, and mostly good conversations about our differences. And as much as I disagree with his stance on most things, I have to say I have a great deal of respect for his intelligence and how well thought out his answers and convictions are. I've actually learned a ton from him over the years, as his different and opposing views have stretched me in areas that I needed to be stretched in. That day, however, there was a definite tone in his message. And I couldn't really blame him. I'd still have grown tired of what seems to be daily occurrences of tragedy and violence in our country and around the world. His question certainly wasn't a new one by any means. It's the age-old question of how can a loving, good, and all-powerful God allow such unlovely, evil, and tragic things to happen in our lives and the lives of those around us? Well, as Christians, our tendency is to fall back on this chapter in Romans a lot. More specifically on the end, where Paul tells us all things work together for the good of those who love God. Now, I want you to hear me when I say this. I believe that truth. I wholeheartedly proclaim that truth, uphold that truth, and I have many times clung to that truth in the midst of adversity. Having said that, though, the day after tragedy strikes, to someone who doesn't even believe that God exists, and if they did believe that he existed, they believe he's ambivalent at best, or inept and mean-spirited at worst. To those people, that verse, the day after tragedy, it doesn't do them any good. And to be honest with you, the moment after tragedy strikes again, that verse, even though I believe it, and even though in the long run I cling to it, sometimes it doesn't do that much for me either in that moment. How can a loving, all-powerful, and good God work out all these things in our culture and in our world for the good of those who love him? How can school shootings and terrorist bombings and abortions and genocides and infant deaths and murder-suicides and drunk driving accidents and rape and a whole bunch of other things we see every day, how can those ever work out to the good of those who love God? How? How can you and I believe that, let alone someone who doesn't even follow God? Well, perspective. Mine and yours, if you're a follower of Jesus, perspectives are different. We take the long view on things. We know that in the end, even though we don't understand how sometimes, Jesus will return and he will set everything right. The answer to all our questions is coming, and we need to remember that even though we don't know how, and even though sometimes it's hard for us to believe that all things can work out for the good of those who love God. That we can believe that we serve a God who can do the impossible. And if he could raise Jesus from the dead, and if he can redeem our sorry, sinful lives, then he can certainly redeem all things as well. In Psalm 69:13, the writer says, "But as for me, my prayer is for you, O Lord. At an acceptable time, O God, in the abundance of your steadfast love, answer me in your saving faithfulness." Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm not a big fan of that phrase, "at an acceptable time." That's the problem, isn't it? We want to have it all work out now, in our time, on our timetable, immediately. And at an acceptable time is, well, sometimes not acceptable to us. We've got to remember that in God's timing, his acceptable time is the perfect time. The perfect time when he will set all things right again. That's a promise. It's a belief that you and I can cling to even when the world doesn't make sense. I take comfort in the fact that I serve a God who can make sense out of our world. I believe in his plan, and I believe in his faithfulness, even in life's toughest struggles. And my hope is that you will believe in it too.